The lifeless leopard cub was placed in the boy's arms. Seconds later, a cry broke the silence. What seemed like a cruel and suddenly became the beginning of a dangerous fight for survival. In a world where the weak are silenced and the powerful take whatever they want, one boy dares to protect what everyone else has already given up on. But saving a fragile life means risking his own, because there are men who would rather see the cub dead than let the truth come out. Secrets from the past run deeper than he ever imagined, and even those closest to him may not be on his side. When every choice could cost him everything, his family, his future, even his life, how far will one boy go to protect a cry that refuses to be silenced? Before we dive in, drop your name or city in the comments. It reminds me that behind every view is a real heartbeat. The autumn wind whistled through the Montana pines as 16-year-old Clint Merrick trudged behind his father Earl along the hunting trail. His boots crunched on fallen leaves, each step careful and measured. Unlike his father's confident stride, Clint moved with hesitation, his rifle hanging awkwardly from his shoulder. "Keep up, boy," Earl called back without turning around. Daylight's burning. Clint quickened his pace, but his mind wandered too. The horses back at the ranch that needed feeding. He'd rather be there than out here hunting. The morning sun barely filtered through the thick canopy, casting dappled shadows on the forest floor. The twig snapped somewhere off to his left. Clint paused, turning his head toward the sound. His father continued forward, unaware that Clint had stopped. Through the trees, Clint caught glimpses of movement, people talking in hushed voices. He recognized Wade Kellerman's distinctive laugh. Curious but cautious, Clint crept closer. Wade had been his father's friend for years, but something about the man had always made Clint uneasy. Through the brush, he could see Wade and two other men standing around the bed of a pickup truck. "Worthless runt," Wade was saying, his voice thick with disgust. "Won't fetch half what we hoped." Clint's heart nearly stopped when he saw what Wade pulled from the truck, a small, spotted leopard cub, its body limp and lifeless. The sight made his stomach turn. This was wrong. Leopards weren't native to Montana. This had to be illegal. Wade's head snapped up, his cold eyes finding Clint before the boy could retreat. "Well, look who we have here. Earl's boy, sneaking around where he doesn't belong." Clint wanted to run, but his feet felt rooted to the ground. Wade stalked toward him, the dead cub dangling from his hand. "Here." Wade thrust the cub into Clint's arms with a cruel smile. "Since you're so interested, maybe you can add it to your collection of strays." The cub's body was still warm. Clint stood frozen, holding the small creature, his mind racing with questions he didn't dare ask. Then, just as Wade turned away, a miracle happened. The tiniest whimper escaped from the cub's throat. Clint's eyes widened. The cub was alive. Wade spun back around, his face darkening. "Give it here, boy." But something shifted inside Clint at that moment. The cub's cry had awakened something, a determination he didn't know he possessed. He clutched the cub closer to his chest, feeling its heart beating against his own. I'll take care of it," Clint stammered, surprising himself with the words. "You don't want it anyway, right? Since it's worthless?" Wade's eyes narrowed dangerously. "This isn't some stray kitten, boy. That there's valuable merchandise. Even half dead." Clint's mind raced. He knew he was crossing a line, but he couldn't let them have the cub back. Not now. Not after feeling its life pulse in his arms. "Please, Mr. Kellerman. I won't tell anyone. I promise." Wade studied him for a long moment, then let out a harsh laugh. "You know what? Keep it. It'll be dead by morning anyway. And if your daddy asks where you got it." He left the threat hanging in the air. Clint nodded quickly, already backing away. His heart pounded so hard he was sure everyone could hear it. The cub stirred weakly in his arms as he hurried through the trees, away from Wade and his men, away from their cruel laughter. He had to hide the cub before his father found him. But where? His mind jumped to the old storage shed behind the barn, the one they never used anymore. It would be warm enough there, and no one ever went inside. "Clint," his father's voice boomed through the trees. "Where'd you get to, boy?" "Coming, Pop," Clint called back, his voice shaking slightly. He looked down at the cub in his arms, its spotted fur dirty and matted, its breathing shallow but steady. "Don't worry," he whispered to it. "I won't let them hurt you anymore." He knew he was probably in way over his head. His father would be furious if he found out. Wade Kellerman was dangerous, everyone knew that. But looking at the helpless cub, Clint knew he couldn't have done anything else. That tiny cry had changed everything. It had awakened something in him, a courage he didn't know he had. Carefully tucking the cub inside his jacket, Clint hurried to catch up with his father, his mind already planning how he would sneak food from the kitchen and care for his secret charge. He didn't know exactly what he was getting into, but he knew one thing for certain. He would protect this cub, no matter what it took. The old storage shed creaked in the evening wind as Clint carefully laid the leopard cub on a bed of soft hay. His hands trembled as he arranged some old horse blankets into a makeshift nest, trying to make it as comfortable as possible. The cub's breathing was shallow but steady, its spotted coat rising and falling with each breath. "Just hold on, little guy," Clint whispered, gently stroking the cub's head. The barn's musty air filled his lungs as he worked quickly, knowing dinner would be ready soon. He'd managed to sneak a bottle of milk from the kitchen and some of the cat food they kept for the barn cats. Warming the milk between his palms, Clint dipped his fingers in it and carefully touched them to the cub's mouth. At first, there was no response. Then, ever so slightly, a tiny pink tongue darted out to lick the milk. Relief flooded through him. "That's it," he encouraged softly. "Just a little more." The shed door suddenly rattled, making Clint's heart leap into his throat. He quickly covered the cub with a corner of the blanket and turned to face the door. "Clint," his father's gruff voice called out. "What are you doing in there?" Just organizing some things, Pa," Clint called back, his voice cracking slightly. He moved toward the door, trying to block the view of the hay pile. Earl Merrick's weathered face appeared in the doorway, his eyes narrow with suspicion. "Organizing? Since when do you care about this old shed? I thought maybe we could use it for something," Clint stammered, his heart pounding so hard he was sure his father could hear it. Earl's gaze swept the shed, lingering on the disturbed hay. "You're acting mighty strange, boy. First disappearing during the hunt, now this." He stepped closer, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. "You're not wasting time on some injured critter again, are you?" Clint swallowed hard, remembering the last time he tried to save a wounded coyote pup. His father had been furious, lecturing him about the foolishness of helping predators. "No, sir," he lied, hating the taste of it in his mouth. "Better not be. Predators are predators, son. They don't need our help, and they sure don't deserve it." Earl's voice was hard with certainty. "Dinner's ready. Get yourself cleaned up." "Yes, sir." Clint followed his father out, carefully closing the shed door behind him. Each step toward the house felt like a betrayal of the tiny life he'd left behind. During dinner, Clint could barely focus on his food. His mother commented on his unusual quietness, but Earl waved it off as teenage moods. Through the window, Clint could see the shed, dark against the twilight sky. Was the cub warm enough? Had it managed to drink more milk? As soon as the dishes were done, Clint headed back out, claiming he needed to check on the horses. The night air was cool against his face as he hurried to the shed, a fresh bottle of warm milk hidden under his jacket. The cub was where he'd left it, but now its eyes were open, bright, alert eyes that followed his movement. Something in that gaze made Clint's chest tighten. There was life there, a fighting spirit that refused to give up. "Hey there, fighter," he whispered, kneeling beside the nest. This time, the cub accepted the milk more eagerly, lapping it from the makeshift nipple he'd created from an old rubber glove that a branch snapped outside, and Clint froze. Through a gap in the shed's wall, he saw a familiar figure moving in the darkness, Wade Kellerman. The man was walking the property line, his flashlight beams sweeping across the ground. Clint held his breath, one hand protectively covering the cub. Wade's light passed over the shed once, twice, before moving on. Only when the footsteps had faded completely did Clint allow himself to breathe again. The encounter left him shaken. Wade wasn't just passing by, he was searching. He didn't believe the cub was dead, and he wanted it back. Looking down at the small creature now contentedly drinking milk, Clint felt a fierce determination rise within him. His father was wrong about predators, wrong about so many things. This cub deserved a chance to live, to grow strong, to be free. And no matter what it took, Clint would make sure it got that chance. He spent the next hour carefully cleaning the cub's fur with a damp cloth, checking for injuries, and making sure the nest was secure. Each tiny improvement in the cub's condition felt like a personal victory, a silent rebellion against his father's Harsh worldview and Wade's cruelty. As he finally headed back to the house, Clint knew he was walking a dangerous line. Discovery would mean more than just punishment. It could mean the cub's death. But looking back at the shed, he felt no regret. For the first time in his life, he was standing up for what he believed in, even if he had to do it in secret. The morning sun had barely touched the horizon when Clint made his way to the shed, arms full of supplies stolen from the kitchen. His mind was so focused on the cub that he didn't notice the figure leaning against the weathered wood until it was too late. Going somewhere interesting? Clint nearly dropped everything. Jessamine Halloran stepped out of the shadows, her auburn hair catching the early light. She nodded at the bottles and rags in his arms. That's an awful lot of supplies for someone who's just organizing. Jess, Clint's voice came out in a strangled whisper. What are you doing here? Watching you act suspicious for the past 2 days. She crossed her arms, but her eyes held curiosity rather than judgment. I saw Wade Kellerman snooping around last night, and now you're sneaking around at dawn with milk bottles. Something's up, Clint Merrick, and I want to know what. Clint stood frozen, his mind racing. Jess had been his neighbor for years, always friendly but distant. Their families ran different circles. But there was something in her face now, a gentle determination that made him hesitate. He started, then stopped. The sound of a weak mule from inside the shed made the decision for him. That Jess's eyes widened. What was that? Clint looked around carefully, then nodded toward the door. Promise you won't tell anyone. Inside, the leopard cub was trying to stand on wobbly legs. When Jess saw it, she gasped softly, kneeling beside the hay nest. Oh my God, Clint. Is this? Found it 2 days ago. Wade and his men were going to let it die. The words tumbled out as Clint explained everything. The hunting trip, Wade's cruelty, his father's warnings about predators. Instead of backing away or threatening to tell, Jess listened intently. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment, watching the cub attempt to take a few unsteady steps. You're trying to save it, she said finally. It wasn't a question. All by yourself. I have to. Clint set down his supplies, reaching for the milk bottle. Nobody else will. Wrong. Jess took the bottle from his hands. I will. She demonstrated a gentler technique for feeding the cub, supporting its head carefully. My aunt rehabilitates injured wildlife. I've helped her with cubs before, though never one quite this exotic. Relief flooded through Clint. You'll help. Of course I will. She smiled, and something warm flickered in Clint's chest. But we'll need to be smart about it. Wade's already suspicious, and he's not the type to let things go. As if to emphasize her point, they heard vehicles approaching on the main road. Peering through the gaps in the wooden walls, they saw Wade's truck crawling past, his hard face visible through the window as he scanned the property. He's looking for something specific, Jess whispered. And I bet it's worth a lot of money. The cub, Clint realized. Exotic animals, rare breeds. People pay fortunes for them. Jess nodded grimly. I've heard rumors about Wade's side business. Animal trafficking, selling to private collectors. A leopard cub could be worth thousands. They spent the next hour properly cleaning the shed, Jess showing Clint how to make a better feeding station and create a warmer nest. Her knowledge was impressive, and Clint found himself watching her confident movements with growing admiration. We'll need to take shifts, she said, laying out a plan. I can come early mornings and evenings. Say I'm exercising my horse along the property line. You take midday and night checks. That way it won't look suspicious if either of us is spotted alone. You've really thought this through. Someone has to. She smiled again, and this time Clint felt his face grow warm. You've got a good heart, Clint Merrick, even if your daddy doesn't see it. Standing up for something right, even when it's hard, that takes real courage. Before Clint could respond, they heard voices outside. Wade was talking to one of the ranch hands, his tone casual but probing. They pressed close to the wall, listening. Seen anything unusual lately? Wade was asking. Any strange animals? Tracks maybe? Can't say I have, the hand replied. Though young Merrick's been mighty interested in this old shed lately. Clint's heart nearly stopped. Beside him, Jess squeezed his arm reassuringly. Has he now? Wade's voice held dangerous interest. Might have to look into that. When the voices faded, Jess and Clint shared a worried look. He's not going to stop, Jess said softly. We'll have to be extra careful now. We? Clint asked, still amazed by her willingness to help. Yes, we. She gathered up the empty bottles, her face determined. That cub deserves a chance, and you deserve someone in your corner. I'm not letting you do this alone. As they carefully left the shed separately to avoid suspicion, Clint felt stronger than he had in days. He wasn't alone anymore. Whatever came next, whatever Wade was planning, he had an ally now, someone who understood, someone who cared, and somehow, that made all the difference in the world that Clint's boots crunched on gravel as he made his way to check on the cub before sunset. The last rays of sunlight stretched long shadows across the ranch, and a cool breeze carried the scent of sage and dust. As he approached the old shed, voices made him freeze mid-step. Wade Kellerman's distinctive drawl drifted from behind the water tower. Clint pressed himself against the weathered wood, heart hammering. Shipments coming Thursday, Wade was saying. 2 snow leopards from Nepal, a pair of clouded leopards from Thailand, plus whatever else they managed to grab. Risky business, another voice replied, one of Wade's men. Especially with that cub still missing. That cub's worth $20,000. Easy. Could have been more if it wasn't injured. Wade's voice hardened. Someone around here knows something. Just gotta squeeze tight enough until they crack. Clint's mind raced. $20,000? The number seemed impossible. But more than that, other leopards, multiple shipments, connections across countries. This wasn't just about one cub. This was organized crime that he waited until their voices faded before slipping into the shed. The cub was awake, stronger now, batting playfully at a piece of rope Jess had brought. Looking at its innocent face, Clint felt sick thinking about all the other animals being captured and sold. We have to do something, he told Jess later that evening when she arrived for her shift. They sat cross-legged in the hay, the cub dozing between them as Clint repeated what he'd overheard. This is bigger than we thought. Jess chewed her lower lip thoughtfully. $20,000 for one cub? No wonder Wade's been prowling around so much. She pulled out her phone, started typing notes. We need to document everything. Dates, times, names, everything you heard them say about shipments. What good will that do? Evidence. Her eyes were fierce in the lantern light. My uncle works for the Fish and Wildlife Service. If we can prove what Wade's doing, they can stop him. But we need more than just overheard conversations. Fear crept up Clint's spine. Wade would kill us if he caught us spying. He'd kill this cub just for profit, Jess countered. Sometimes, doing the right thing means being scared, but doing it anyway. The next few days became a careful dance of observation and documentation. Clint noticed things he'd overlooked before, strange vehicles arriving late at night, mysterious crates being loaded at odd hours, hushed conversations that stopped when anyone got too close. Jess taught him to use his phone to take discreet photos and videos. Always back everything up, she insisted, and never let Wade see you watching. But Wade was watching them. His presence became more oppressive each day. He cornered ranch hands in the barn, his friendly smile never reaching his eyes as he asked casual questions about their activities. People started avoiding each other's gazes, conversations dying when he approached point one morning. Clint found old Mr. Peterson, who ran the general store, looking shaken. Wade paid me a visit, the old man muttered when Clint asked if he was okay. Reminded me how much business my store gets from his men. Said it'd be a shame if people started shopping elsewhere. He gripped Clint's arm. Whatever you're mixed up in, boy, be careful. That man's got hooks in deep around here. The warning hit home when Clint discovered his father's truck had been vandalized. Nothing major, just enough damage to send a message. Earl blamed teenage troublemakers, but Clint saw Wade watching from across the yard, that same cold smile in place. He's trying to scare everyone into staying quiet, Clint told Jess as they tended to the cub that evening, making sure nobody asked questions about his business trips or strange deliveries. Then we have to be the ones who do ask questions, Jess said firmly. She showed him the notes she'd been keeping, dates, times, license plate numbers of unfamiliar vehicles. The more we gather, the harder it'll be for him to hide what he's doing. The cub had grown stronger, more playful. It pounced on Clint's boot laces, and despite his worries, he couldn't help smiling. Then he remembered Wade's words about the other leopards being shipped in, and his smile faded. Thursday, he said quietly. That's when Wade said the next shipment is coming. If we could somehow get proof. It would be dangerous, Jess warned. If we're caught. I know. But like you said, sometimes being scared isn't a good enough reason not to do something. Clint scratched behind the cub's ears, watching it lean into his touch. These animals can't speak for themselves. Someone has to. They spent the next hour planning, marking possible observation points on a map of the ranch, working out schedules and signals. The task felt enormous, terrifying, but having Jess beside him made it seem possible. As they finished their planning, a truck engine roared to life somewhere in the darkness. They peered through the gaps in the wooden walls to see Wade's vehicle prowling slowly past, its headlights sweeping the area like searching eyes. "He knows something's up," Jess whispered. "We'll have to be extra careful now." Clint nodded, watching the truck's taillights disappear into the night. The simple rescue of one cub had grown into something far more dangerous and far more important. They were no longer just saving one life, but fighting against a system of cruelty that stretched across continents. The raid came at midnight. Clint was checking on the cub one last time when engine sounds shattered the quiet. Headlights blazed through the barn's weathered walls, casting harsh shadows that danced like demons. Well, Wade's voice carried through the darkness. "Looks like we found our little thief." Boots crunched on gravel outside. Clint's heart hammered as he scooped up the frightened cub, desperately searching for an escape route. The barn door crashed open, spilling light and men inside. Wade stood in the doorway, his silhouette massive against the glare of truck headlights. "Hand it over, boy," Wade commanded. "That's valuable merchandise you've been hiding." "No." Clint backed away, clutching the trembling cub closer. "You can't have him." Wade's laugh was cold as winter steel. "Can't have him? Boy, everything here belongs to me. Your daddy made sure of that years ago." Before Clint could process those words, something hit him from behind. The cub yelped his rough hands tore it away. Clint lunged after it, but two of Wade's men grabbed his arms, pinning him in place. "Let him go," Jess's voice rang out. She'd been keeping watch outside and now stood in the doorway, brandishing a pitchfork. Wade barely glanced at her as he signaled to his men. "Take care of this mess." No evidence. The smell hit Clint's nose first, gasoline, sharp and chemical. His eyes widened as he saw men splashing it along the barn's wooden walls. "No," he shouted, struggling against the hands that held him. "Nothing personal," Wade said, already walking away with the crying cub. "Just business. Your daddy understood that once. Shame you never learned." Smoke began curling up the walls. The men holding Clint suddenly shoved him hard, sending him sprawling into a pile of hay. By the time he scrambled up, flames were already racing along the gasoline trails. Clint, Jess, appeared through the thickening smoke, grabbing his arm. "This way." They ran for the back of the barn, where loose boards created a narrow gap. The fire roared behind them, hungry and fierce. Smoke burned Clint's lungs as he helped Jess squeeze through the opening, then followed her into the cold night air. They didn't stop running until they reached the shelter of an old oak tree. Looking back, Clint watched helplessly as orange flames devoured the barn, reaching toward the star-filled sky like grasping fingers. "All our evidence," Jess coughed. "Everything we documented." Wade knew. Clint's voice was hollow. He knew exactly where to look. "But how?" "Because I told him." The new voice made them both jump. Earl Merrick stepped out from the shadows, his face illuminated by the distant fire. He looked older somehow, worn down by some heavy burden. "Dad." Clint stared at his father in disbelief. You helped him?" "Not this time," Earl said quietly. "But years ago?" "Yeah. Wade and I were best friends once. Started our ranches together, shared everything. When times got hard, he found other ways to make money. Asked me to look the other way. And I did." The betrayal hit Clint like a physical blow. "You knew? All this time, you knew what he was doing." "I told myself it wasn't my business. That friendship meant keeping quiet." Earl's voice cracked. "But watching my own son risk his life to do what I should have done years ago, I can't stay quiet anymore." Clint turned away, unable to look at his father. The barn's flames reflected in his eyes, matching the burning in his chest. Everything he thought he knew about his father, about right and wrong, seemed to crumble like the barn's charred timbers. "They took the cub," he said finally, his voice thick with smoke and emotion. "Wade's got a shipping container down by the old railroad spur," Earl offered. "That's where he keeps the animals before transport." "But Clint, you can't can't what?" Clint spun to face his father. "Can't stand up to him? Can't do what's right? Someone has to, Dad. Even if it wasn't you." The word struck Earl like slaps. He seemed to shrink in the firelight, shoulders bowing under the weight of his past choices. Jess touched Clint's arm gently. "We need to call my uncle. The wildlife service can dash. There's no time." Clint cut her off. "The next shipment's tomorrow. Once those animals are gone." He couldn't finish the thought. The barn's roof collapsed with a thunderous crash, sending a fountain of sparks into the night sky. In their orange light, Clint saw his father's face, the shame, the regret, and something else. Something that looked almost like pride. "The cub," Clint said firmly. "We're getting it back. Tonight." Clint slumped against an old fence post, his clothes still reeking of smoke. The barn's remains glowed dimly in the distance, a reminder of his failure. His father's confession had torn open something deep inside him, leaving him hollow. "I trusted him my whole life," he whispered, more to himself than to Jess. "Everything he taught me about right and wrong. Was it all just words?" Jess stood beside him, her face smudged with soot, but her eyes bright and determined. "Your father's choices aren't yours, Clint. You proved that tonight. And what good did it do?" His voice cracked. "The cub's gone. Our evidence is burned. Wade's won, just like he always does." Clint's shoulders sagged as he stared at his trembling hands. Maybe Dad was right. Maybe some things are just too big to fight. "Stop it." Jess grabbed his shoulders, forcing him to look at her. "Remember that first night? When Wade threw that cub at you, thinking it was dead. But it wasn't dead, was it? It fought. That tiny thing refused to give up." The memory of that weak cry, barely more than a whisper, echoed in Clint's mind. He could still feel the sudden warmth spreading through his chest when he realized the cub was alive. "We've tracked Wade's operation for weeks now," Jess continued. "We know where he takes his rich clients. That fancy hunting lodge up in Carter's Ridge. The one where they pretend they're real hunters while shooting captive animals." Clint nodded slowly. They'd seen the expensive cars driving up there, heard whispers about private hunts and exotic trophies. "But that place is like a fortress. Security cameras, armed guards. And tomorrow night, it'll be full of potential witnesses." A fierce smile crossed Jess's face. "Think about it. All those wealthy clients, there to buy their illegal trophies. What happens if someone exposes what's really going on? With everyone watching?" Understanding dawned in Clint's eyes. Wade couldn't silence everyone, not with his reputation and business at stake. "Exactly." Jess pulled out her phone, showing him the photos they'd managed to save. "We still have proof of the trafficking. We just need to show the right people at the right moment." Clint stood straighter, his mind racing with possibilities. The charity auction. Wade hosts it every year at the lodge, makes himself look like some kind of conservation hero. Perfect cover for his real business, Jess agreed. "But tomorrow night, we use that cover against him. My uncle in the wildlife service, he's been looking for solid evidence against Wade for years. One phone call, and he'll have agents ready." Hope flickered in Clint's chest, small but growing stronger. "We'd have to get inside first. Past the security. I've got that covered." Jess grinned. "Remember my cousin who works in the lodge kitchen? She owes me a favor. Big time." For the first time since the barn fire, Clint felt the weight on his shoulders lighten slightly. He looked at Jess, really looked at her. This girl who'd stood by him, who believed in him even when he'd stopped believing in himself. "This isn't just about one cub anymore, is it?" he said quietly. "It never was." Jess squeezed his hand. "This is about doing what's right, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. That's what makes it matter." Clint took a deep breath, letting the cool night air clear his head. The shame of his father's betrayal still ached, but something else was taking its place, a determination that ran deeper than fear or doubt. "If we fail," he started, "then we fail trying." Jess finished firmly. "But we won't fail. You know. Why? Because that cub didn't give up, and neither will we." Looking toward the distant lights of Wade's lodge, Clint felt his resolve harden into something unbreakable. Tomorrow night would change everything, for better or worse. The thought should have terrified him, but instead, he felt strangely calm. "We need to plan this perfectly," he said. "One mistake, and Wade won't hesitate to. Then we don't make mistakes." Jess pulled out a small notebook, one of the few things they'd saved from the barn. "Let's get to work." Under the stars, they began mapping out their desperate gambit. Every detail had to be perfect: their timing, their evidence, their backup plans. The odds were stacked against them, But Clint no longer cared about odds. He cared about justice, about protecting the innocent, about proving that one person's courage could make a difference. Tomorrow, they would take the fight to Wade's door. But tonight, they would prepare. And as Clint caught Jess's determined smile, in the moonlight, he knew he wasn't alone in this battle. Sometimes the biggest acts of courage started with the smallest cry for help. Just like a wounded cub's whisper in the dark, that Clint's heart pounded as he adjusted the white server's jacket Jess's cousin had smuggled to them. The hunting lodge's kitchen buzzed with activity as staff prepared for the evening's charity auction. Wealthy buyers mingled in the grand hall beyond, their polite laughter masking darker intentions. "Remember," Jess whispered, straightening her own uniform, "we need photos of the holding area in the East Wing. That's where Wade keeps the animals before the private hunts." Clint nodded, careful to keep his movements measured and confident like the other servers. Years of avoiding attention on the ranch had taught him how to blend into the background. Now, that skill might save their lives. They separated, each taking a silver tray of champagne glasses. Clint moved through the crowd like a shadow, his ranch-trained ears catching snippets of conversation. A heavy-set man in an expensive suit discussed special arrangements with Wade. Another guest mentioned exotic specimens in hushed tones. When no one was looking, Clint slipped down a service corridor. The sound of his boots on the polished floor reminded him of sneaking past sleeping cattle. He'd learned young how to place each step to avoid making noise. Those same skills now guided him past security cameras and guard stations. The first locked door yielded to the master key Jess's cousin had copied. Clint's nose wrinkled at the familiar scent of animals in captivity, not the healthy smell of livestock, but the desperate musk of trapped wildlife. His stomach clenched as he rounded a corner and saw the cages. Tigers paced in spaces barely larger than horse stalls. Snow leopards huddled in corners, their magnificent coats dulled by confinement. In one cage, a mother leopard curled protectively around two cubs, siblings to the one Wade had nearly killed. Clint's hands shook as he took photos with his phone, documenting everything. A noise made him freeze. Two guards walked past the corridor's entrance, their boots heavy on the floor. Clint pressed himself against the wall, using the shadows like he did when calming spooked horses in the dark. The guards passed without noticing him. "Got what we needed from the East Wing." Jess's voice came through his earpiece, barely above. A whisper. "Moving to the office now. Be careful." Clint breathed back. Wade's still in the main hall, but his security chief keeps checking the upper floor. He made his way to their rendezvous point, an unused storage room near Wade's private office. Years of handling skittish animals had given him an instinct for danger. Every nerve tingled with warning as he approached the room. Jess was already inside, her face pale but determined. "Found the shipping manifests," she whispered, showing him photos on her phone. "Dates, buyers, prices, everything we need to prove the trafficking ring." A floorboard creaked outside. Clint reacted instantly, pulling Jess behind a stack of boxes. His body remembered countless moments of stillness while tracking wounded animals or approaching nervous colts. That same stillness saved them now as Wade's security chief passed by the door. "We need to get these photos to your uncle now," Clint said once the footsteps faded. Before Wade realized his dash, the door burst open. Wade Kellerman filled the frame, his expensive suit unable to hide the predator beneath. Two armed guards flanked him. "Well," Wade's smile was cold as a Montana winter. "Looks like we have some uninvited guests. Though I must admit, I'm impressed. You made it this far. Those ranch skills of yours came in handy after all, didn't they, boy?" Clint stepped forward, shielding Jess. The movement was automatic, like protecting a smaller animal from a threat. His voice stayed steady as he replied, "Those skills help me see what you really are. A coward who preys on things weaker than himself." Wade's face darkened. "Bring them," he ordered the guards. "Let's show them what happens to people who stick their noses where they don't belong." But even as rough hands grabbed them, Clint felt a fierce pride. His quiet nature, his gentleness with animals, his ability to move unseen. Everything his father had dismissed as weakness had brought them this far. They had the evidence. Now they just had to survive long enough to use it. The guards marched them toward the back of the lodge, away from the charity auction's crowded halls. Clint's mind raced, cataloging every detail like he would while tracking an injured horse. Exit doors. Guard positions. The weight of his phone, still recording everything in his pocket. Most importantly, the slight nod Jess gave him, telling him their backup plan was already in motion. His supposed weaknesses had become their greatest weapons. Now it was time to use them. The storage room erupted into chaos. Jess drove her elbow into one guard's stomach while Clint twisted free, years of wrestling calves making his movements quick and sure. They bolted through the door, their footsteps thundering down the hardwood hallway. "Split up," Clint shouted. "Meet at the kennels." Wade's furious roar echoed behind them as Jess darted left and Clint sprinted right. His heart hammered against his ribs, but his mind stayed clear. The path to the animal holding area was burned into his memory. 3 lefts, 1 right, down the service stairs. The locked door gave way to Jess's copied key. Inside, the leopard cub huddled in its cage, eyes bright with recognition. Clint's fingers trembled as he worked the lock, remembering that first cry that had changed everything. "Come on, little one," he whispered. The cub pressed against his chest as he lifted it, trust overcoming fear. Running footsteps approached. Clint tensed, but it was only Jess, breathless and flushed. "Guards are distracted up front," she panted. "Dad's friends created a scene at the auction like we planned. We've got maybe 5 minutes." They slipped out the back entrance, using the cover of decorative shrubbery. The Montana night wrapped around them, familiar and sheltering. Clint's truck waited in the staff lot, hidden behind delivery vans. The cub trembled against him as they climbed in. "We did it," Jess breathed as the engine roared to life. "We actually did it." Clint allowed himself a smile as they pulled onto the access road. The evidence was safe on their phones, the cub was rescued, and Wade's operation would soon be exposed. Years of being called soft, of enduring his father's disappointment. It had all led to this moment of triumph. The happiness lasted exactly 3 minutes. Headlights blazed behind them, 3 sets cutting through the darkness. The truck's engine whined as Clint pressed the accelerator. But Wade's vehicles were newer, faster, designed for pursuit over rough terrain. "Hold on." Clint swerved onto a logging road, hoping his knowledge of the back country would give them an edge. The cub mewed in fear as they bounced over ruts and rocks. Jess braced herself against the dashboard, her face tight with worry that a shot cracked through the night. Their rear tire exploded, sending the truck into a wild spin. Clint fought the wheel, but momentum carried them off the road. They slammed to a stop against a stand of pines. "Run!" Clint grabbed the cub, and they scrambled out, diving into the underbrush. Thorns tore at their clothes as they pushed through, but ranch life had taught them both how to move through rough country. Behind them, engines growled closer. They burst into a small clearing. Moonlight silvered the grass, making them terribly visible. Before they could reach the far tree line, Wade's vehicles surrounded them. Lights blazed, temporarily blinding them. Car doors slammed. "Quite a chase," Wade's voice carried across the clearing. He stepped into view, rifle casual in his hands. "But it ends here. Hand over the cub and your phones, and maybe I'll let you walk away." Clint clutched the cub tighter. "You'll just keep doing this. Killing animals, selling them to the highest bidder. That's business, boy. Something you clearly don't understand." Wade gestured, and his men moved forward. Last chance. Everything happened at once. Jess tried to run, but a guard caught her arm, twisting it behind her back. She cried, out in pain. Another guard tackled Clint from behind. The cub tumbled from his arms as he hit the ground hard. His phone skittered across the grass, screen cracking. Wade picked up the phone, examining it before crushing it under his boot. He nodded to his men, who roughly hauled Clint and Jess to their feet. The cub cowered nearby, too frightened to move. "You know what your problem is." Wade stepped close to Clint, his breath hot with contempt. "You're weak, just like your old man always said. Thought you could play hero? All you've done is prove him right." The words cut deeper than Clint's physical pain. He watched helplessly as one of Wade's men scooped up the trembling cub. All their planning, their careful preparation, it meant nothing against Wade's brutal efficiency. The evidence was destroyed, the cub recaptured, and they were at the mercy of a man who had none. "Take them up to the ridge," Wade ordered. "Make sure they understand what happens to people who cross me." Rough hands pushed them forward. Jess stumbled, her face streaked with tears of frustration. Clint's chest ached with each breath, ribs bruised from the tackle. But worse than the pain was the crushing weight of failure. They had come so close to exposing Wade's operation, to proving that compassion could triumph over cruelty. Now, surrounded by armed men in the cold Montana night, that dream felt as broken as his phone. The cubs' frightened cries faded behind them as they were marched into the darkness, leaving hope scattered like shattered glass in the moonlit clearing. Earl Merrick stood in the charred remains of the old barn, his boots crunching on blackened wood. The morning sun couldn't pierce the heavy smell of smoke that still clung to everything. His weathered hands traced the scorched wall where Clint and that Halloran girl had barely escaped with their lives. "Thought I might find you here," Wade's voice cut through the stillness. Earl turned slowly, seeing his old friend standing in the barn's skeletal doorway. But something had changed in how Earl saw him now. The morning light caught the cruel set of Wade's mouth, the cold calculation in his eyes that Earl had chosen to ignore for so many years. "You tried to kill my boy," Earl said quietly. Wade shrugged, casual as discussing the weather. He stuck his nose where it didn't belong. "Just like you taught me, sometimes you gotta put down trouble before it spreads." The words hit Earl like a physical blow. How many times had he used that same harsh logic? How many times had he dismissed Clint's gentle nature as weakness, never seeing the courage it took to stay kind in an unkind world? "I was wrong," Earl's voice cracked. "About everything. You're getting soft in your old age." Wade stepped closer, his boot heel grinding ash into the dirt. "Remember when we started out? Two broke ranchers with nothing but grit and mean spirits to get by? Look at me now. I've built an empire while you're still scratching in the dirt. Built it on blood, money," Earl spat, "on cruelty and greed. I let you do it. Look the other way because it was easier than standing up to an old friend." Wade's face hardened. "Watch yourself, Earl. Friendship only goes so far." "Friendship," Earl laughed bitterly. "That died when you tried to burn my son alive." The tension crackled between them like the lingering heat in the barn's ruins. Wade's hand drifted to the gun at his hip. "Don't make me do something we'll both regret. You've done enough." Earl turned his back deliberately, showing Wade exactly how little he feared him now. "Get off my land." Wade's footsteps retreated, but his parting words hung in the air. "This isn't over." Earl stood alone in the ruins until the sun was high overhead. Then he walked slowly back to the ranch house, where he knew Clint was recovering from his injuries. His son sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a coffee mug, looking older than his 16 years. "Son," Earl's voice was rough. "I need to say something." Clint looked up, his eyes guarded. The bruises on his face made Earl's heart ache with shame. "I've been a coward." Earl pulled out a chair, the wood scraping against linoleum. Watched Wade turn into something evil and did nothing to stop it. "Worse than that, I tried to make you hard like him. Like me." "Dad dash," Clint started, but Earl held up his hand. "Let me finish. I was wrong about what makes a man strong. Thought it meant being tough, mean when necessary. But you," Earl's voice caught, "you showed more courage standing up for what's right than I ever had standing by while wrong was done." Silence filled the kitchen. Outside, a meadowlark called, sweet and clear. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," Earl continued. "Just want you to know I'm with you now, whatever it takes to stop Wade." Clint studied his father's face for a long moment. Then he pushed back his chair and stood. "We'll need help. Wade's got armed men, connections. It won't be easy. Nothing worth doing ever is," Earl said, rising to stand beside his son. For the first time in years, they faced each other as equals. "You got a plan?" "Maybe." Clint's eyes held a determined glint. "But it's dangerous. Could cost us everything." Earl nodded, feeling the weight of all his past failures lift as he finally chose the right path. "Then we better make it count." Together, father and son began to prepare for the battle ahead. They cleaned rifles, checked ammunition, and mapped out Wade's likely movements. The sun tracked across the sky as they worked, casting long shadows through the kitchen windows. Both men knew that come morning, they would either stop Wade's operation for good or die trying. Dawn painted the Montana cliffs in shades of amber and rose as Clint, Jess, and Earl made their way up the narrow trail. The Leopard Cub's carrier swayed gently in Clint's arms, its occupant unusually quiet, as if sensing the gravity of the moment. "He'll be waiting at the top," Earl whispered, his rifle steady in weathered hands. Wade always liked the high ground. The trail grew treacherous, loose rocks skittering beneath their boots. To their right, the cliff face dropped away into shadow. To their left, jagged rock walls hemmed them in. The perfect trap, Clint realized, just as a voice rang out above them. That's far enough. Wade Kellerman emerged from behind a boulder, flanked by two armed men. His expensive hunting gear seemed oddly out of place against the wild backdrop. Hand over the cub, Clint, and maybe I'll let you walk away this time. Clint felt Jess tense beside him. His father's finger curled around his rifle's trigger. But Clint had learned something about true strength these past weeks. It wasn't always about who had the biggest gun. You're finished, Wade, Clint called back, his voice steady despite his pounding heart. We've got proof of everything. The trafficking, the poaching, the barn fire, all of it. Wade's laugh echoed off the rocks. Proof? Boy, I own half the judges in this state. Your evidence won't mean a thing if you're not alive to present it. The first shot cracked across the canyon without warning. Earl Dove left, returning fire as Jess and Clint scrambled for cover. The cub whimpered in its carrier, and Clint hugged it closer, protecting it with his body. What followed was chaos. Bullets sparked off rocks. Men shouted. Through it all, Clint watched. Not just the gunfight, but the terrain, the movement of shadows, the way the wind pulled at loose clothing. All those hours spent reading animal behavior on the ranch had taught him to see patterns others missed. Wade was moving, trying to circle behind them. But Clint saw something else, a patch of unstable ground near Wade's position, masked by morning shadows. The same kind of treacherous footing that had claimed so many cattle over the years. Jess, Clint whispered, passing her the carrier. When I move, be ready to run. Before she could protest, Clint burst from cover, seemingly making a mad dash. Straight at Wade. The poacher's eyes widened in surprise, his gun swinging around. But Clint wasn't aiming for Wade. He was aiming for the ground beneath him. Clint's shoulder slammed into the loose scree just as Wade fired. The bullet whispered past his ear as the entire slope began to shift. Wade's triumphant expression turned to horror as the earth crumbled beneath his feet. His gun went flying as he scrambled for purchase. In seconds, the advantage shifted. Wade's men, distracted by their boss's predicament, were caught off guard by Earl's precise shots. One dropped his weapon, clutching his shoulder. The other surrendered immediately. Wade himself hung precariously from a root, all his power and menace stripped away by simple gravity. Clint stood over him, not with hatred, but with something like pity. Need a hand? Clint asked quietly. Wade's eyes met his, and for a moment, raw fear replaced the cruelty. Then Clint reached down, gripping Wade's wrist and pulling him to safety, and into Earl's waiting handcuffs. You're under citizen's arrest, Earl growled, securing Wade's hands. The sheriff's already on his way, along with federal agents very interested in your business dealings. As if on cue, sirens echoed in the distance. Wade sagged in defeat, his empire crumbling as surely as the cliff edge had. Jess approached. With the carrier, her face glowing with pride. The cub inside purred contentedly, as if knowing the danger had passed. You did it, she said softly, touching Clint's arm. You actually did it. Earl stepped forward, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. You sure did, son. Not with muscle or meanness, but with that quiet strength I was too blind to see. His voice roughened with emotion. Your mother would be proud. I know I am. Clint felt the warmth of the rising sun on his face, matching the warmth in his heart. The boy who had once thought himself weak had found his own kind of courage, not in violence, but in standing firm for what was right, in protecting the innocent, in being exactly who he was meant to be. The leopard cub stretched in its carrier, letting out a chirp that sounded almost like approval. Tomorrow would bring challenges of its own, finding the cub a proper sanctuary, ensuring Wade faced justice, healing the rifts in their community. But for now, in this moment, everything was exactly as it should be. If you believe stories can heal, lift, and connect us, this channel is for you. Thanks for being here. Hit subscribe, and I'll meet you again tomorrow with something real.